The bottle was small, amber plastic with a cheerful green label, Golden Age Daily Wellness Blend. Warren had set it on my nightstand 3 months before that Tuesday morning, along with a glass of water and the particular smile he'd worn since he was 7 years old, and had done something he knew I wasn't going to like. "Dr. Patton recommended these, Mama," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Good for memory, good for circulation, just 2 every morning." I had reached for the bottle. I had turned it over. I had read the label the way you read something when you've spent 37 years behind a pharmacy counter, and you understand that what's printed on the front of a bottle and what's actually inside it are not always the same conversation. The label listed 4 ingredients: valerian root extract, melatonin, passion flower, and a compound listed under a trade name I didn't recognize at first glance. I had looked up at my son. His eyes were on the window. "Thank you, baby," I said, and Warren exhaled. The way a person exhales when they've been holding their breath and someone has just told them the test came back negative. He patted my hand, told me he loved me, and left the room. I sat with that bottle in my lap for a long time. Not because I was confused, not because I was afraid, because I recognized that exhale, and I recognized that trade name. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. And my name is Celestine Winters. I'm 73 years old. I spent 37 years as a licensed pharmacist, most of them behind the counter of the Cascade Drugs and Sundry in a mid-sized city in Georgia, where everybody knew your name and your mother's name and your mother's mother's name, and thought that gave them license to know your business too. I knew every medication that came through that counter. I knew the brand names, and the generic names, and the chemical compounds underneath both of those names. I knew what diphenhydramine hydrochloride did to the central nervous system of a person over 60. I knew what happened when you combined high-dose valerian root extract with 5 milligrams of melatonin and a sedating antihistamine in quantities larger than what an elderly woman's liver could process without becoming foggy, unsteady, or confused. That trade name on the label, the one I didn't recognize at first glance. I recognized it on second glance, but I want you to understand something before we get to what I found in that bottle. Before we get to what my grandson Jordan showed me on a Tuesday morning that changed everything I understood about the shape of my own family. I want you to understand who I was before I sat in Warren's guest room with that bottle in my hand, reading a label I wasn't supposed to be able to understand. My husband, Chester Winters, was not a complicated man. He was a quiet one. He drove a used pickup truck for 16 years after we could have easily afforded a new one. He wore the same 2 pairs of work boots until the soles separated from the uppers, and then he'd take them to a cobbler on 4th Street named Mr. Beaumont, who'd been resoling shoes since before either of us were born, and he'd have them fixed and wear them another 5 years. Chester said the best things in life didn't need advertising. He worked in commercial real estate appraisal for 40 years, quietly, without fanfare. He did not drive a luxury car to impress clients. He did not belong to the kinds of clubs where men shook hands and patted each other on the back and called it business. He built his practice the old-fashioned way, by knowing the value of land better than anyone else in 4 counties, and by telling the truth about it, even when the truth was inconvenient to someone with more money than he had. When Chester died 11 years ago of a stroke, quiet as he had lived, he left me a letter. Not just a will too, of course, but also a letter. He wrote it by hand on yellow legal paper in his careful, deliberate script, and he told me 3 things. He told me he had loved me since the first time he saw me standing behind the pharmacy counter at the Rexall on Montgomery Street, reading a patient's chart with my reading glasses pushed up on my forehead. He told me that our son Warren was a good boy who had married a woman who worried him, and that I should watch carefully and trust my own judgment over the judgment of anyone who needed me to doubt myself. And he told me that the 40-acre parcel of land he'd purchased in 1998 in the next county over, the one that had seemed like a long shot at the time, had become something significant. It was held in a trust with his family attorney, Marcus Lee Whitfield, of the firm Whitfield and Associates, and under no circumstances was I to mention it to anyone until I was certain they deserved to know. I folded that letter and placed it in my safety deposit box at First Community Bank, where I kept my important papers. Then I went to work the next day, because standing behind a pharmacy counter was the only way I knew how to grieve. Chester had been right about one thing above all others. Warren was a good boy. He called me every Sunday. He drove down to see me 3 times a year and remembered my birthday and Mother's Day, and sometimes just a random Tuesday because he'd seen something that made him think of me. He had his father's eyes and his father's quiet way of entering a room without disturbing whatever piece was already in it. But Chester had also been right about Denise. I should tell you about the house. After Chester died, I stayed in our home on Magnolia Ridge Road for 4 years. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen with a breakfast nook that faced the back garden. Chester had planted wisteria along the back fence in the first year we moved in, and every spring it came back purple and extravagant, like it was personally offended by the idea of restraint. The house was paid off. The property taxes were manageable. My pension from 37 years as a licensed pharmacist, combined with Chester's retirement accounts, meant that I was, by any practical measure, comfortable. I did not need rescuing. But Warren started asking, not immediately. He waited a respectful interval, the way a good son does. But after the 4th year, the asking began to take on a different texture. He had accepted a position at a company headquartered in the northern suburbs, which meant a long commute if he stayed in the city. He and Denise had moved to a large house in a subdivision called Emerald Pines. All the houses had brick fronts and 3-car garages, and the particular kind of sameness that comes when an architect designs 200 homes and runs out of ideas by house number 12. The pitch came on a Sunday afternoon in October. Warren sat across from me at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold between his hands, and he said very gently that it would be nice if I weren't so far away, that Denise had suggested I might like the area, that the guest suite was large and comfortable and had its own bathroom, that Jordan, who was 12 at the time, would love having his grandmother nearby. He did not say, "We would feel better knowing someone is keeping an eye on you," but I heard it. I told him I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 months. I walked through my house at night, room by room, touching things. Chester's chair by the window in the den. The kitchen tile we'd argued over for 2 weeks because I wanted yellow, and he thought yellow was impractical. The garden with the wisteria going dormant for winter, already quietly plotting its return. What made me agree in the end was Jordan. My grandson was 12 years old, and every time I saw him, he looked at me the way children look at the people they are still young enough to love without complication. He wasn't embarrassed by me yet. He still wanted to hear my stories. He brought me things to look at, a rock he'd found, a drawing he'd made, a page from a book he thought I'd like. I moved to Emerald Pines in the spring. I want to be fair to Denise Winters. Some people are cruel by design. Denise was not that. She was something more modern, more difficult to name. A woman so thoroughly convinced of her own narrative that she had never stopped to consider whether the narrative was true. In Denise's version of things, she was a selfless daughter-in-law who had opened her beautiful home to her aging mother-in-law out of the goodness of her heart. She said this version out loud, frequently, at dinner parties, and in the captions of the photographs she posted online of the 3 of us at the table, her arm around my shoulders, her smile as bright and practiced as a car dealership sign. In the actual version of things, I had sold my home. I had sold Chester's garden, and the yellow kitchen tile, and the breakfast nook, and the 4 years of grief I'd pressed into every wall of that house. I had sold it, and I had contributed a substantial sum to the household, not to the mortgage, not because Denise was specific that she didn't want the mortgage complicated, but to what Warren called the Household Stabilization Fund. an account that Denise had primary operational access to, because as Warren explained, Denise handled the domestic finances. Denise was better at that sort of thing. I had said quietly that I would like to have access to that account as well, or at minimum to receive quarterly statements. Denise had smiled. Of course, Mama Seeley. Whatever makes you comfortable. I did not receive the statements. When I mentioned it to Warren 3 months later, he rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when a conversation was making him uncomfortable. Denise is handling it, he said. You know how she is. Very organized. She's got a system. I'm sure she does, I said. And I made a note of the date. The guest suite was beautiful. I'll give Denise that. Pale blue walls, cream curtains, a window that looked out onto the back lawn where the subdivision's landscaping company came every second Thursday to perform exactly the same maintenance on exactly the same grass. There was a small bookshelf, a comfortable chair, a bathroom with a heated tile floor that my joints appreciated more than I wanted to admit. In the beginning, I told myself it was fine. I could adjust. I had spent 37 years adjusting to the particular demands of a pharmacy. The last-minute calls, the insurance disputes, the patients who couldn't read their own doctor's handwriting. A person who could manage all of that could manage a guest room in her son's house. But there is a difference between adjusting to circumstances and disappearing into them. Denise had a method. It was not obvious enough to be called a campaign. It was more like weather, the gradual accumulation of small pressures until you found yourself reaching for an umbrella without quite remembering when it started raining. She never told me outright that I was an intrusion. She said things like, I just find it easier when the kitchen has one cook. And, Mamaxili, you're so precious, but I've got a system for the grocery order. And, the neighbors might wonder if they see the curtains open at that hour. We try to keep a consistent look from the street. She moved things I had put down. She changed settings I had adjusted. She had a thermostat she controlled from her phone. She and my room was always either 2 degrees too warm or 4 degrees too cold. And when I mentioned it, she would look at me with the patient, slightly sorrowful expression of a woman managing something difficult and say, I'll look at the settings, Mama Seeley. The system can be tricky. Jordan saw it. I knew he saw it because of the way he appeared in the doorway of my room on the evenings when Denise had been particular with a book or a card game, or once, memorably, a slice of pound cake wrapped carefully in a napkin that he had cut himself from a cake his mother had made for a neighborhood meeting that had not yet occurred. I thought you might want some, he said, offering me the plate with the gravity of a 12-year-old who understood that this was an act of small resistance. Thank you, baby, I said, and I meant it more than he knew. The vitamins arrived in Warren's hands on a Thursday evening in late February. He had been to see their family physician that afternoon, Dr. Patton, a man in his late 40s with a practice on Meridian, a perfectly competent general practitioner with no particular expertise in geriatric care, and, as far as I could determine, no reason on his own initiative to prescribe a wellness supplement to a patient he had never examined. He said these are excellent for women your age, Warren said, setting the bottle on my nightstand. Specially formulated. He said a lot of his patients over 70 have had really positive results. I picked up the bottle. I read the label. I have read tens of thousands of labels in my professional life. I have caught errors that would have harmed people, substitutions that looked innocent and weren't, dosages that looked standard and weren't, interactions that no one had thought to flag until someone who knew how to read was paying close attention. I had read labels the way other people read novels, not because I was required to after a certain point, but because it was the language my mind had lived in for the better part of 4 decades. The label said, Golden Age Daily Wellness Blend. It listed 4 ingredients in order of concentration. Valerian root extract, melatonin, 5 milligrams, passion flower extract, and at the bottom, in slightly smaller type, a trade name, diphenhydramine HCl complex. Diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl. an over-the-counter antihistamine compound that causes drowsiness, cognitive dulling, and impaired reaction time in healthy adults, and that in adults over 65 has been associated in multiple peer-reviewed studies with increased risk of falls, confusion, and acute cognitive impairment severe enough to mimic the early presentation of dementia. It was, in the precise language of my former profession, contraindicated for elderly patients, not recommended, actively warned against. It was also not an ingredient that anyone who genuinely wanted to support an older woman's cognitive health would select. I looked at my son. He was watching me with that expression he had worn since childhood, when he wanted something and didn't want to ask for it directly. Chin slightly down, eyes a little too careful. "Who suggested this specific product?" I said. "Dr. Patton," he said. "Did Dr. Patton recommend the specific product? Or did Denise bring it to him and ask if it was all right?" Warren's jaw moved slightly. "Mama, why would you—" "That's all right," I said. I set the bottle down on the nightstand. "Thank you for thinking of me." Warren went downstairs. I waited until I heard the television come on in the living room. Then I opened the drawer of my nightstand and put the Golden Age bottle inside. From beneath my bed, I retrieved my travel case, the one I'd carried since Chester was alive. Inside was a small amber prescription bottle, left over from a short-term medication I had taken the previous year. I had been a pharmacist long enough to know that an amber bottle with a typed label looks, to the uninitiated eye, exactly like any other amber bottle with a typed label. I carefully transferred 2 capsules from the Golden Age bottle into the amber prescription bottle and tucked it into the inner pocket of my winter coat at the back of the closet. Then I went downstairs to help set the table, and I smiled at Denise, who smiled back at me. We were very accomplished at smiling at each other by then. For the next 3 months, I did not take the vitamins. Every morning, I performed the motions. I carried the water glass to my nightstand. I opened the Golden Age bottle. I appeared to anyone passing the doorway to take my 2 capsules with my morning water. What I actually did was document. Each week, I dissolved 2 capsules from the bottle and sealed them carefully in a small labeled bag that I kept in the travel case alongside the amber prescription bottle, noting the date and the capsule count. I was a retired pharmacist. I kept documentation habits I had never unlearned, old habits from a lifetime of understanding that if you cannot prove a thing, it is as though the thing did not happen. And what I watched, across those 3 months, was the texture of the house changing around me. Denise began making small observations at the dinner table. Nothing severe, nothing that could be reported back to Warren as direct cruelty, just concerns, floated lightly into the air the way cigarette smoke used to drift, not aimed at anyone, just there, filling the space. "Mama Seeley, didn't you mention calling the bank today? I just want to make sure you remembered, with everything on your mind." "Warren, I think your mother may have left the stove element on again this morning. Not a problem. I caught it. Just something to be aware of going forward." Dr. Patton mentioned that memory changes at this stage are completely normal. I've been doing a little reading. It might be worth exploring some additional options for long-term support. Long-term support. I was a 73-year-old woman with a fully functioning mind, 37 years of pharmaceutical expertise, a carefully maintained pension, and the deed to 40 acres of commercial real estate in a county that 2 separate development companies had been quietly trying to acquire for the past 18 months. Long-term support. I said nothing. I nodded at the appropriate moments. I became, in the eyes of that dinner table, a woman who was being lovingly managed. And I took very precise note of every single thing I observed. Where Jordan had always been the kind of child who paid attention to the wrong things, by which I mean the right things that everyone else overlooked. At 15, he was tall and a little awkward in his height, the way boys get when their bones grow faster than their confidence. He had his grandfather Chester's eyes, that particular shade of brown that goes nearly amber in afternoon light, and Chester's same quality of stillness, of actual presence, of listening to what a person was saying, rather than simply waiting for his turn to respond. He came to my room most evenings, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours, depending on what was happening in the rest of the house. He brought things to show me: homework he was proud of, articles he'd read online, questions he'd been turning over in his mind for days before he felt ready to ask them aloud. He told me about his friends and his teachers and the particular social mathematics of being 15 in a school where status was measured in metrics he found genuinely baffling. He had noticed the changes in how I was being discussed, not because there were actual changes in me. Because I had not been taking the vitamins, my mind remained exactly what it had always been, but because he was a boy who noticed gaps between what was said and what was true. "Mom says you've been getting forgetful," he said to me one evening. He said it flatly, the way teenagers say difficult things when they've decided they trust you enough to be direct. "Your mother is very concerned," I said. "Are you?" he asked. "Are you actually getting forgetful?" I looked at my grandson. I had been protecting him, not putting the weight of what I knew onto those 15-year-old shoulders. But he was asking me something real, and he deserved a real answer. "No," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way his grandfather used to nod when something had been confirmed that he had already half known. "Okay," he said. That was a Tuesday in April. The following Tuesday, he came to my room after dinner, with his phone in his hand and the particular expression of a boy who has found something he wished he hadn't and cannot unknow it. "Grandma," he said. He closed the door behind him. He held the phone out to me. On the screen was a search result. He had been worried about me. He had gone to the kitchen, picked up my vitamin bottle from the counter, where Denise kept it as a visible reminder of my care, looked at the ingredients, and Googled the one he didn't recognize. The search result was a medical reference page. The heading at the top was in large red text. "Warning: diphenhydramine HCl, not recommended for adults over 65. Associated with increased risk of cognitive impairment, acute confusion, falls, and delirium. Multiple studies link regular use in elderly populations to accelerated dementia-like symptoms. Use should be avoided." I took the phone from his hands. I read the entire page. Then I scrolled down and read the related studies he had also pulled up, because Jordan was thorough the way his grandfather had been thorough, and he had apparently been at this for some time before he came to find me. I handed the phone back to him. "Hi, sit down, Jordan," I said. He sat on the edge of the chair by the window, Chester's amber eyes watching me. "I know," I told him. His face changed. The alarm didn't leave, but something underneath it shifted. A kind of terrible relief mixed with a kind of terrible understanding. "You knew," he whispered. "I've known for 3 months." "And you've been taking them anyway?" "I haven't been taking them at all." He stared at me. The relief deepened. And then, slowly, something else moved into his face. The first outline of anger, the kind that rises in a young person when they realize that someone they love has been endangered deliberately and that the danger came from inside the house. "Grandma," he said. His voice had gone very quiet. "What are we going to do?" I looked at my grandson. Chester's eyes in a 15-year-old face, watching me with the uncomplicated loyalty of someone who had made a decision, without announcement or ceremony, about which side of what was coming he intended to stand on. I thought of Chester's letter, the 40 acres, the attorney whose name I had memorized and never spoken aloud to another living person. I thought of Denise's voice at the table, long-term support. I thought of Warren's exhale when I said, "Thank you, baby." And I understood that I had been waiting for 3 months, not out of fear, not out of confusion, but because the evidence had to be complete, the witnesses had to be certain, and the response had to carry the full weight of what had been done. Jordan had just placed the last piece in my hands, not because I hadn't already found it, but because now there was a witness who had found it independently, a 15-year-old boy with clear eyes and his grandfather's stillness and a phone screen that said, in plain, unambiguous language, what the people in this house were attempting to do to the woman who loved them. I placed my hand over his. "We're going to do exactly the right thing," I said. "But not tonight. Tonight, you are going to go back downstairs, eat whatever dessert your mother made, and be normal. Can you do that?" He looked at me. He was thinking, really thinking, the way Chester always had before he answered a serious question. "How long?" he asked. I had already run the calculation. 2 weeks, I said. "Maybe 3. Jordan nodded. He understood, without my having to explain it, that the move made in anger is almost never the correct one. He was his grandfather's grandson. He stood. He pocketed his phone. He looked at me one last time at the door. "Grandma," he said. "Yes, baby." "You're the sharpest person I know." He closed the door behind him. I sat for a long time in my blue-walled guest room, looking at the amber plastic bottle on my nightstand. And I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless for 3 months. Something quiet and certain and old. I had spent 37 years protecting strangers from things they didn't know were coming for them. It was time, at long last, to protect myself. And the two of us, one old woman and one 15-year-old boy, both carrying the same pair of amber eyes, were going to do it carefully, completely, and right. The first call I made was not to a lawyer. It was to a woman named Patricia Odom, who had been my closest friend since the year we were both 26 and working the same pharmacy counter at a Rexall on Montgomery Street that smelled of mentholatum and floor cleaner, and the particular compressed anxiety of sick people waiting to feel better. Patricia had left the profession 15 years earlier to open her own independent lab testing service, a small, precise operation that processed samples for physicians' offices and, occasionally, for private clients who needed documentation that would hold up in a formal proceeding. I called Patricia on a Wednesday morning while Denise was at a spin class, and Warren was at the office, and Jordan was at school. I called from my car, parked 2 blocks from the house, the engine running. Patricia answered on the second ring, the way she always had. "Seeley," she said. "Nah, it's been a month." "It's been 6 weeks," I said. "Patricia, I need a favor." There was a brief silence on her end. Patricia Odom had known me for 47 years. She understood the difference between a Celestine who called with news and a Celestine who called with a purpose. "Tell me," she said. I told her. I told her about the bottle and the label, and the compound at the bottom of the ingredient list, and the 3 months of capsules I had been preserving in labeled bags in my travel case. I told her about the medical reference pages Jordan had shown me, which I had already confirmed independently using 3 separate peer-reviewed sources. I told her what I needed: a certified chemical analysis of the capsule's actual contents, including precise concentrations of each compound, AWA documented on lab letterhead with chain of custody notation. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That was not uncertainty. It was the silence of a professional assembling her process. "How many samples?" she asked. 12 weeks. 2 capsules per week, each pair in a dated sealed bag. "Good girl," she said, which was what she had said to me in 1974, when I correctly identified a dispensing error that the supervising pharmacist had missed. "Get them to me by Friday," I told her I would. "Seeley," she said, just before I ended the call. "Yes." "Is Warren involved? Does he know what's in those capsules?" It was the question I had been asking myself for 3 months. I had turned it over in the same way I used to turn over a difficult patient interaction, not to reach a comfortable conclusion, but to reach an accurate one. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I intend to find out." The second call was to Marcus Lee Whitfield. Marcus had been Chester's attorney for 22 years. He was a compact, careful man in his early 60s who had the particular quality of making you feel that every document you signed in his presence would outlast you. Not as a threat, but as a promise. Chester had trusted him absolutely, which meant I trusted him in the same proportion, since Chester had reserved his absolute trust for roughly 4 people in his entire life and had never been wrong about any of them. I had spoken to Marcus twice since Chester's death, once to review the trust documents, once to confirm an appraisal he had arranged on my behalf without my asking, because he had seen something in the market numbers and wanted me to have the information before I needed it. Both conversations had been brief and entirely practical. The third conversation, on a Thursday afternoon from the parking lot of a public library 4 miles from Emerald Pines, was different. "Mrs. Winters," Marcus said when his assistant put me through, "I've been expecting to hear from you." That surprised me. "Have you? Mr. Whitfield spoke of you often," he said. Not Chester's name, Mr. Whitfield. He had called Chester that since the beginning, in the old-fashioned way of a man who understood that respect is a form of precision. He told me that if you ever called with urgency in your voice, I should listen before I advised. I sat in my car in the library parking lot, and for just a moment I felt Chester's absence, the way you feel it when it's fresh, like a missing step in a staircase you know by heart. "I'm listening," Marcus said. I told him the shape of things, the household stabilization fund my contribution had gone into, Denise's operational access and my absence of it, the quarterly statements I had never received, the vitamins and the compound, and the documented samples now on their way to Patricia Odom's lab, the long-term support language, the narrative Denise had been building about my memory, my forgetfulness, my need for additional care. Marcus listened without interruption. He had the same quality Chester had, of giving his full attention so completely that you could feel it as a physical thing. When I finished, there was a pause. "Mrs. Winters," he said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "The 40 acres. Does anyone in the household know about them?" "No," I said. "Chester was explicit in his letter. I've told no one." "Good. Keep it that way for now." A pause. "And the household fund? Do you have any documentation of the original contribution? Transfer records, signed agreements, any written correspondence regarding your access rights?" "I have everything," I said. "I kept copies of every document I signed. Chester taught me that." Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that direction. "He taught you well. All right, Mrs. Winters. Here is what I need you to do." He gave me a list. It was specific and methodical, the way Chester's instructions had always been. And it told me, without his saying so directly, that he had already been thinking about this, that he had perhaps been thinking about this since Chester first told him to listen if I called with urgency in my voice. I wrote everything down on the small legal pad I always kept in my glove compartment, the same kind Chester had used, yellow with blue lines. When the list was complete, Marcus said, "And Mrs. Winters, the lab results from your friend. When you have them, send them to me immediately, certified mail and digital both. That documentation is going to matter." "In what context?" I asked, though I already had a sense. "In the context," Marcus said carefully, "of any future proceeding that attempts to establish that your cognitive function is impaired. The existence of a sedating compound in a supplement being administered to you by members of your household, combined with a simultaneous campaign to document memory difficulties, creates a pattern that a court would find significant." I let that settle. "You knew," I said. "I suspected," he said. "Chester told me that the woman his son married was ambitious, in a way that made him careful." He said it quietly, not unkindly. He was careful with his words. A brief pause. "He also told me that you were the smartest person he had ever loved, and that if anything went wrong, you would figure it out before anyone else did." I gripped my yellow legal pad and did not cry, because I was sitting in a library parking lot in broad daylight, and I had work to do. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We're just getting started." If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. I want to tell you what those 2 weeks looked like from the outside, because from the outside, they looked like nothing at all. I woke each morning and performed the motions of my life in that guest room with its pale blue walls and cream curtains. I came downstairs and sat at the breakfast table and said good morning to Warren, who was always half distracted by his phone, and to Denise, who was always entirely distracted by the management of appearances. Thus, I poured my coffee and ate whatever was on offer, and made the small talk that filled the hours of a household that had never really made room for me. I continued to set the Golden Age bottle on my nightstand each evening, where Denise could see it if she passed the open doorway. I continued to perform, each morning, the motions of taking my 2 capsules. I continued to be, in all observable ways, Mama Seeley, the slightly vague, comfortably managed, aging mother-in-law who needed her vitamins and her gentle supervision. Denise's observations at the table continued. They were, if anything, slightly more frequent now, slightly more pointed, as though someone had made a decision about a timeline and was beginning to press on it. Warren, I've been reading about this facility up near the lake. Not a nursing home. I'm more of a luxury wellness community, very progressive. I think it might be worth a visit. Just to know our options. Warren nodded in that way he had developed of nodding at whatever Denise said, while looking at the middle distance. I had begun to notice, in those 2 weeks, that Warren's nods had a different quality than they once did. There was something underneath them, not dissent, not awareness, but something restless that didn't quite agree with the expression on his face. I filed that observation alongside the others. Jordan was extraordinary. I want to say that plainly, because what I asked of him in those 2 weeks was not a small thing. I asked a 15-year-old boy to carry knowledge that frightened him, to sit at a dinner table with the people who frightened him, and to be normal. He did it with a composure that would have made his grandfather say, quietly, with a private smile, "That's my boy." Even though Chester was, in strictly biological terms, Jordan's paternal grandfather, not his great-grandfather, and the relationship was perhaps more complicated than that simple phrase suggests. But there was nothing complicated about how Jordan looked at me. He came to my room each evening. He didn't stay long, 10 minutes, 15, because long absences would have been noted by Denise, who noticed the texture of the household the way a spider notices a thread. He came with his phone and showed me things. An article he'd read, a math problem that interested him, on it a video about the migration patterns of monarch butterflies that he thought I'd like for no reason he could articulate, except that he thought of me when he saw it. And once, toward the end of the 2nd week, he came and sat in Chester's chair, the one I'd brought from Magnolia Ridge Road, the single piece of our old furniture that I had insisted on bringing, the one Denise had suggested twice would look better in storage. And he said, "Grandma, are you scared?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I said. "Not at all." "I'm sad," I said. "Scared and sad are different things. Scared is when you don't know what's coming. Sad is when you do." Jordan sat with that for a moment. "I'm scared," he said. "I know, baby." "What if it doesn't work? What if they don't believe you?" I looked at my grandson, 15 years old, amber eyes, sounder Chester's capacity for stillness in the presence of difficult things. I thought about everything I had been building in those 2 weeks, the lab results that had come back from Patricia Odom's facility on a Tuesday afternoon in a sealed envelope I had immediately photographed and forwarded to Marcus. The financial documentation Marcus had helped me reconstruct from my own careful records. The dated, labeled bags of preserved capsules with their chain of custody notation. The notes I had kept in my yellow legal pad since the first morning I had read the ingredient label and recognized the compound underneath the trade name. "Jordan," I said, "when your grandfather Chester taught me to keep records, he said something I've never forgotten. He said, 'A liar needs you to have a bad memory. The truth doesn't need anything except to be documented.'" Jordan looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. The fear didn't leave, but it moved to the back. the way fear does when it has been replaced by something more purposeful. Okay, he said. Okay, I agreed. He left to go back downstairs. I opened my yellow legal pad and drew a line at the bottom of the last page of notes, the way a pharmacist draws a line at the bottom of a dispensing record when the prescription is complete. I was ready. I need to tell you about the household fund. Marcus had spent those 2 weeks doing what Marcus did, working quietly, without announcement, through channels I did not need to understand in detail. What he found was this: the Household Stabilization Fund, into which my contribution had been deposited, was, on paper, a joint account in Warren and Denise's names, with a secondary designy notation that included me. In practice, that designation had never been activated, meaning that while my name appeared on the paperwork, I had no functional access to the account. The designation required a secondary verification process that had never been completed. Denise had, it appeared, been aware of this. More significantly, Marcus had found that the account had been drawn down to 32% of its original balance over the preceding 18 months. The withdrawals were frequent and varied. Some labeled household maintenance, some labeled professional development, some labeled family wellness. None were labeled in a way that corresponded to an actual household expense Marcus could identify. The most recent withdrawal had been made 9 days before my call to Marcus. It was for $14,000. It was labeled Property Research Consultation. Marcus did not speculate. He documented. He also found something else, which he told me in a phone call made to my car, parked this time outside a grocery store 3 miles from the house. His voice was steady and measured, and entirely without drama, which was, under the circumstances, the most frightening way he could have delivered what he said. "Mrs. Winters," he said, "in reviewing the trust documents from Chester's estate alongside the publicly available corporate filings, I've found that a holding company called Meridian Land Partners, LLC, was registered in this state 14 months ago. Its registered agent is a law office on the west side of the city. Its stated purpose is commercial real estate investment and development." I waited. Meridian Land Partners, LLC, has filed a letter of intent with the County Planning Office regarding a parcel of commercial land in the adjoining county. The letter of intent was filed 8 months ago. The parcel it references is identified by a tax map number. He gave me the number. My hand went still on my yellow legal pad. That was the tax map number of Chester's 40 acres. The 40 acres that no one knew about. The 40 acres whose existence Chester had asked me, in a handwritten letter on yellow legal paper, said never to disclose to anyone until I was certain they deserved to know. I sat in my car outside a grocery store, and I felt something that was not anger and was not fear, but was a very clean, very cold version of understanding. The kind that comes when the last piece of a pattern falls into place, and you see not just what has been done, but how long it was planned. "Marcus," I said. "Yes." "Who are the principals of Meridian Land Partners?" "The registered agent is a firm I don't recognize, but the beneficial ownership disclosure lists 2 names. One is a development consultant I have no information about. The other," he said, "is a woman named Denise Adrian Winters." I closed my eyes. Chester's letter. "Our son Warren is a good boy who has married a woman who worried him. Watch carefully. Where I trust your own judgment over the judgment of anyone who needs you to doubt yourself." He had known. Not exactly, not in detail, but he had known the shape of her, and she had spent 14 months, at minimum, trying to find the land she suspected existed, trying to maneuver me into a position where I could not stand in her way, building a narrative about my memory, my decline, my need for management, administering a compound that, taken faithfully each morning, would have produced in a woman of my age exactly the symptoms she was already attributing to me. If I had taken those vitamins, if I had not been a pharmacist for 37 years, if I had not had Chester's voice in my ear, always, reminding me to read the fine print. I opened my eyes. "Marcus," I said, "I'm here." "We need to move faster," I agree, he said. Mrs. Winters, there is one more thing. I've spoken with a colleague in family law. Given the documented pattern, the financial access, the pharmaceutical component, the simultaneous cognitive impairment narrative, we are likely looking at grounds for adult financial exploitation. In this state, that is a criminal matter as well as a civil one. I see, I said. This means that the timing of your next steps matters considerably. If Denise becomes aware that you've accessed any of this information before we've properly positioned your assets, she may move quickly to shift the remaining funds in the household account. How much time do we have? The land parcel. There's a developer meeting scheduled at the county planning office in 17 days. Meridian Land Partners is on the agenda. They will need the title chain to be clean for any transaction to proceed. If your ownership is undisclosed, they'll try to proceed without you. The moment they do, the irregularity becomes a matter of public record, and we have our opening. 17 days. I thought of Jordan saying, "What if they don't believe you?" I thought of Chester's letter. I thought of 37 years of reading labels that no one else thought to read. All right, I said. Let's talk about what needs to happen in 17 days. The family dinner was Warren's idea. This is important. I want you to understand that clearly, because in the telling of stories like this one, it is tempting to attribute all agency to the person doing the harm. Denise had planned a great deal, but she had not planned the family dinner. Warren called me on a Monday morning, 11 days before the county planning meeting, 6 days before I needed to be in Marcus's office to finalize several documents, and said that his sister Laverne was coming down from Columbus for the weekend, and that he thought it would be nice to have a proper family dinner on Saturday evening. His sister, his wife, me, Jordan, and Laverne's husband Michael. He said it with a hopefulness that broke something small and careful in my chest, because it was his father's hopefulness, the particular quality of a man who believes that the right circumstances, gathered together at the right table, can make the complicated things simple. Of course, I said. I'll make the macaroni. There was a pause. Denise said she was planning to cater. Denise can cater everything else, I said pleasantly. I'll make the macaroni. Another pause. Then Warren laughed. A real laugh, not the polished social one. His father's laugh, which I had not heard from him in a long time. Okay, Mama, he said. The macaroni? I called Marcus that afternoon and told him about the dinner. He was quiet for a moment. Laverne, he said. Chester spoke of her. Chester spoke very well of her, I said. Laverne is a practical woman. She was a social worker for 20 years. She knows what a pattern looks like. Marcus considered this. Does she know what you know? Not yet. Are you planning to tell her at this dinner? I'm not planning anything dramatic, I said. And this was true. I had learned, in 37 years behind a pharmacy counter, that the most important thing a person can do in a crisis is not to perform the crisis. The documents would speak for themselves. The lab results would speak for themselves. The timing would be what it would be. I did not need a scene, but a family dinner, properly attended, creates witnesses. And witnesses, as Marcus had told me the first time we spoke, were going to matter. Mrs. Winters, Marcus said, I want to share something with you. In 17 years of estate law, I have watched a great number of families navigate a great number of difficult situations. And in my experience, the moment that changes everything is almost never the loudest one. No, I agreed. It rarely is. The document I need you to sign on Friday is the asset protection transfer. Once that's recorded, the 40 acres are formally moved into the trust amendment Chester and I prepared before his death, an amendment no one outside this office is aware of. At that point, any transaction Meridian Land Partners attempts to pursue becomes legally untenable. They cannot proceed, cannot close, cannot benefit from a title chain they do not control. And the household fund? I've prepared a formal notice of account irregularity with supporting documentation. It will be filed with the state's Adult Protective Services Financial Exploitation Unit on Monday morning. At that point, the account is flagged, access is suspended pending review, and the burden of explanation shifts entirely to the account holder of record. I thought about the $14,000 labeled property research consultation. I thought about the remaining 32%, whatever was left of what I had put in, the money from Chester's house, from the garden, and the yellow kitchen tile, and the breakfast nook that faced the wisteria. "And Warren?" I said. Marcus was quiet. "Warren," he said carefully, "is not listed as a beneficial owner of Meridian Land Partners. He is not a signatory on the irregularity pattern we've documented. The funds were in an account bearing his name, which creates complexity, but the operational pattern of access and withdrawal points overwhelmingly to a single actor." "You're telling me he may not have known," I said. "I am telling you that the evidence does not require him to have known," Marcus said. "What he knew, what he chose not to see, what he was told and chose to believe, those are questions for a different kind of proceeding. What I am telling you, as your attorney, is that your son is not your adversary in this matter, which means the dinner on Saturday may be more important than it appears." I sat with that. "My husband said Warren was a good boy," I said. "I know," Marcus said. "He said it to me, too." Friday came. I drove to Marcus's office in the morning, while Warren was at work, and Jordan was at school, and Denise was doing whatever Denise did on Friday mornings that she never quite accounted for when I asked. I sat across from Marcus at his desk, and I signed the documents he had prepared. The asset protection transfer for the 40 acres. The trust amendment Chester had initiated, and I was now completing. A formal power of attorney designating Marcus as my representative in any proceeding related to the household fund. Marcus watched me sign with the same careful attention he gave to everything. "Mrs. Winters," he said when I had finished, "I want to ask you something personal, and I hope you'll forgive me for it." "Ask," I said. "When this is resolved, when the financial question is settled, and the exploitation matter is in the hands of the appropriate authorities, what do you want? Not what do you want to happen to the people involved. What do you want for yourself?" I had been thinking about this for 3 months, since the Tuesday morning when I first read the label on the amber plastic bottle and recognized the compound printed in slightly smaller type at the bottom. "I want to go home," I said. "Home," he repeated. "I want a house of my own. I want to plant something in the backyard that will come back every year, whether I tend it or not. I want to eat breakfast in my own kitchen without managing someone else's idea of what my mornings should look like." I paused. "And I want my grandson to be able to visit me whenever he likes, without needing permission or a reason." Marcus nodded. He wrote something on his legal pad. Not notes, I thought. Just the motion of a man who is moved and doesn't want to show it directly. "The 40 acres," he said. "Chester had a reason for acquiring them when he did. The development interest has been escalating for the past 3 years. At current market value, the parcel, conservatively, is worth somewhere between $2.3 and $2.8 million. Depending on how you choose to proceed with the development interest, you could be looking at considerably more." I looked at him. In all the months of preparation, in all the calls from parking lots, and all the yellow legal pad pages of notes, I had not let myself think about the number. It had felt too much like the kind of thinking that leads a person astray, the kind that makes you move for the wrong reason. "Chester," I said, "knew exactly what he was doing," Marcus said. "He told me once that the best thing a man can do for the woman he loves is to make sure she never has to need anyone she doesn't want to need." I looked out Marcus's office window at the city in the morning light. $2.3 million, at minimum. 40 acres that Chester had bought in 1998 for a modest sum, quite with the quiet long-view certainty of a man who read the shape of the land and the shape of the future and was patient enough to wait for both. He had left me this. He had left me this, and his letter, and a warning about the woman Warren married, and a reminder to trust my own judgment, and he had trusted me to figure out the rest. I thought about Denise. About the LLC filed 14 months ago. About the compound at the bottom of the ingredient list. About the word forgetful said at the dinner table in front of the pastor and the neighbors and anyone else who might later serve as a witness to my decline. She had gone to considerable lengths for a land parcel she didn't know the value of, owned by a woman she had convinced herself was past the point of defending herself. She was about to find out what 37 years of reading fine print, combined with Chester Winter's long view and a 15-year-old boy's internet search, had produced. I stood up. I thanked Marcus. I drove back to Emerald Pines. That evening, I made a pot of tea in the kitchen, and Denise came in while the kettle was heating and leaned against the counter in her particular way, the way that was not threatening but was always somehow in the way, and said, "Mama Seeley, I've been thinking. I'd love to take you to visit that wellness community next week. Just to see, no pressure." I poured my tea. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "Let's see how Saturday goes first." Denise smiled. It was her best smile, the warm, wide, practiced one she used for photographs and for moments she expected to win. I smiled back. Mine was smaller, but it was real. Saturday arrived the way important days often do, with ordinary weather and no announcement. Laverne pulled into the driveway at 2 in the afternoon in a sensible sedan, and she came through the door with the solid, unself-conscious presence of a woman who has spent 20 years walking into difficult situations and making them calmer by sheer force of groundedness. She was 58, 3 years younger than Warren, with Chester's broad forehead and her mother's sharp eyes, and the particular way of holding herself that said she was paying attention to more than she was commenting on. She hugged me in the entryway with both arms and said in my ear, "You look good, Mama Seeley. You look like yourself." I held on to that hug for just a moment longer than usual. Michael, just her husband, was a retired firefighter turned middle school football coach, a large, kind, uncomplicated man who smelled of coffee and Old Spice and gave Warren a handshake that turned into a half embrace. Jordan appeared from upstairs and submitted to Laverne's inspection with the resigned dignity of a teenager who knows the inspection is coming and has decided to simply endure it. Denise was everywhere, greeting, directing, managing the evening with the practiced fluency of a woman who had planned every detail down to the candles on the dining table and the exact trajectory of the conversation. She was warm and capable and beautiful in a dark green dress. And if you didn't know what to look for, you would have looked at that table and seen a family. I made the macaroni. I made it in Chester's pot, so the one I had brought from Magnolia Ridge Road, the heavy Dutch oven that Denise had suggested twice, would look better in the lower cabinet where she could reach it more easily, and that I had left on the counter where I could reach it instead. I made it the way Chester had liked it, with 3 cheeses and a breadcrumb crust that blistered just at the edges, and when I brought it to the table, the smell of it was so entirely the smell of home that Jordan, sitting across from me, caught my eye and smiled. His grandfather's smile, small and private, and completely sincere. Dinner moved through its courses. Michael told a story about a coaching incident that made everyone laugh. Laverne asked Jordan about school and listened to his answers with actual attention, the way she had always done. Warren poured wine and was more relaxed than he had been in weeks, loosened by his sister's presence, by the ordinariness of a family evening, by the macaroni that tasted like his childhood. Denise told a story about the wellness community near the lake. She framed it as a charming anecdote. She had toured it that week, she said, just to be informed, just to understand the landscape of options, because we all loved Mama Seeley and wanted to be thinking ahead responsibly. Laverne set down her fork. It was a small motion, a quiet one. But Laverne had the same quality I had learned to watch for in the people I most trusted. The quality of doing everything deliberately, so that even the small things meant something. "What kind of options?" Laverne said. "Just long-term care?" Denise said smoothly. "It's really more of a luxury community. It's very progressive. It's not what people think of when they hear the phrase. Mama Seeley, you'd actually love the gardens." Laverne looked at me. I was eating my macaroni. Mama Seely, Laverne said, do you want to visit a long-term care community? I want to be in my own home, I said pleasantly. I've wanted that for some time now. The table was quiet. Not loudly quiet. The kind of quiet that is really a room recalibrating. Warren was looking at his plate. Denise recovered swiftly. She had, I will give her credit, genuine skill in recovery. Of course, and that's a conversation we can have. We want whatever Mama Seely wants. I just think it's responsible to be informed about. Denise, Laverne said. Not sharply, not with accusation. Just with the particular tone of a woman who has spent 20 years as a social worker and has stopped having patience for performances. Denise stopped speaking. Mama Seely, Laverne said, turning to me fully. Has anyone asked you directly what you want? I looked at my daughter-in-law across the table, at Warren beside her, at Jordan, who had gone very still, amber eyes watching me. I set down my fork. No, I said. Not once in 14 months. Warren looked up. There it was. That quality I had noticed beneath his nods, the restlessness that didn't quite agree with the expression on his face. It was fully visible now, in the candlelight of a dinner table that his sister had made honest by the simple act of asking a real question. Mama, he said. His voice was different from the Warren who patted my hand and told me to trust Denise's system. It was closer to his father's voice. What do you want? I looked at my son. I thought of Chester's letter. Warren is a good boy. I thought of Marcus's voice. The evidence does not require him to have known. I want to go home, Warren, I said, and I want to show you something before the evening is over. Denise's expression shifted, the practiced warmth flickering at its edges like a candle in a draft. Mama Seely, she said, I think we should save any big conversations for. I think now is the right time, I said, and my voice was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the voice I had used for 37 years, when I needed someone to hear me through their own fear about what I was saying. Steady and clear, poised and carrying the full weight of what I knew. I stood up from the table. Jordan, I said, would you please bring my travel case from the closet in my room? You know which one. Jordan stood up immediately. He was out of the room before Denise could formulate a response. I sat back down and finished the last 2 bites of my macaroni, because Chester's recipe deserved to be finished, and because a woman who has been patient for 3 months can afford to be patient for 2 more minutes. Warren was watching me with an expression I had not seen on his face in a long time. It was the expression of a boy who has begun to suspect that the thing he's been told is not the thing that is true. Denise was watching me with an expression I had not seen before on her face. Not the warmth, not the management, not the practiced performances. Fear. Small and precise and real. The room was quiet. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Jordan came back downstairs with my travel case and set it beside my chair without a word. He sat back down across from me. Michael and Laverne were still. Warren had put down his wine. I opened the case. The first thing I placed on the table was the certified lab report from Patricia Odom's facility. 12 pages on letterhead with a chain of custody notation and Patricia's signature and the signatures of 2 witnessing technicians. I placed it in the center of the table between the macaroni and the candles. I've been taking vitamins, I said, for 3 months. Warren brought them for me in February. He said Dr. Patton recommended them. Silence. The label lists 4 ingredients. The last one, listed under a trade name, is diphenhydramine hydrochloride. I tapped the lab report. This is a certified chemical analysis of the actual contents of those capsules. It confirms the presence of diphenhydramine at a concentration of 25 milligrams per capsule, compounded with valerian root and melatonin. I looked at Warren. Diphenhydramine, taken daily by a woman my age, in that concentration, would have produced, within 6 to 8 weeks, the symptoms of cognitive impairment, memory difficulties, confusion, unsteady gait, a presentation, to an observer who didn't know what was causing it, that would look exactly like the early stages of dementia. Warren had gone the color of the cream curtains in my guest room. "I have not been taking the vitamins," I said. "I recognized the compound on the label the day you brought them. I've been preserving the capsules as evidence." Laverne made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a woman who has spent 20 years recognizing patterns and is recognizing one now. Denise pushed her chair back from the table. "Mama Seeley, I don't know what you think." "I'm not finished," I said. I placed the second document on the table. The account statements Marcus had reconstructed. 18 months of withdrawals from the Household Stabilization Fund, the one my contribution had gone into, the one I had never received statements for. "I contributed a substantial sum to this household when I moved in," I said, "into an account I was told I had access to. I have never, in 14 months, received a statement. This is what that account looks like." I pointed to the balance. "This is what it looked like when I moved in. This is what it looks like now." Warren was looking at the numbers. I watched him looking at the numbers. I watched the numbers land. "And finally," I said, placing the third document, the corporate filing Marcus had printed for me, the Meridian Land Partners LLC registration, with its list of principals. "This is a holding company registered 14 months ago. Its purpose is commercial real estate investment. It filed a letter of intent with the county planning office regarding a piece of commercial land that belonged to my husband and, upon his death, to me." I looked at Denise. She was not looking at the document. She was looking at me. "The land is held in a trust," I said. "It has been continuously, clearly, legally mine since Chester died. No transaction involving that parcel can proceed without my participation." I paused. "I imagine someone has been trying to determine how to change that situation. The vitamins would have been one approach. Documenting my cognitive decline would have been another. Establishing my need for long-term care management would have been the last step." The room was so quiet I could hear the candles. I looked at Warren. "I did not bring this to the table to humiliate anyone," I said, and I meant it. "I brought it because you are my son and Chester's son, and you deserve to know what has been happening in your house. Whatever you knew and didn't know, that's between you and God. But I will not leave this table tonight as a woman who doesn't know the shape of her own situation." Warren opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mama," he said. His voice had broken slightly at the edges. I didn't know about the land." "I know," I said. "I didn't know what was in the vitamins." I looked at my son for a long moment, Chester's eyes in an older face, looking at me with the specific anguish of a man who has just understood exactly how far he allowed himself not to look. "I know that too," I said. Laverne reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her grip was steady and warm, and said, without words, that she had understood everything I had just laid on that table, and that she was not going anywhere. Jordan was looking at his mother, not with anger, not yet, perhaps not for a long time, but with the clear, undisguised gaze of a 15-year-old boy who had Googled an ingredient out of love for his grandmother and had learned something he would carry for the rest of his life about the difference between the people who protect you and the people who perform the protection of you. Denise said nothing. She was looking at the corporate filing with the particular expression of a person who has spent months constructing a reality and has just watched it become unworkable in the space of a dinner. I picked up my napkin, refolded it, and placed it beside my plate a second time. "I'm going to have Marcus send everything to the appropriate authorities on Monday morning," I said. "That process will take whatever time it takes. In the meantime, I'll be staying in my room until I can make other arrangements." I paused. "I'll do my own grocery shopping from now on." I stood up. I looked around the table, at Michael, large and still and decent, at Laverne, her hand still warm over mine, at Jordan, watching me with his grandfather's steady eyes, at Warren, who was sitting in the ruins of a careful negligence and beginning to understand what it had cost. The macaroni, I said, was good, and I walked out of the dining room, up the stairs, and into the pale blue guest room with Chester's chair by the window, and the cream curtains, and the heated tile floor. I sat down in Chester's chair. I opened my yellow legal pad to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Monday. And I began the list of everything that came next. Sunday was the quietest day I had spent in that house. Not because it was peaceful, because it was the particular quiet that falls after something irreversible has been said aloud. The quiet of a household that has stopped pretending, because the thing it was pretending around has been named in front of witnesses and can no longer be unmade. I stayed in my room through the morning. I heard Warren and Denise's voices below, low and continuous, the rhythm of a conversation that had been running all night and had not yet reached its end. I could not make out words, and I did not try. Some conversations between a husband and wife are not mine to hear, even when the subject of them is me. Jordan knocked on my door at 9 o'clock. He brought coffee, made the way I liked it, strong, with cream, no sugar, in the blue mug I had brought from Magnolia Ridge Road that Denise had twice suggested was too large for the mug tree. He sat in Chester's chair and wrapped both hands around his own mug and looked out the window at the subdivision's identical back lawns, bare and orderly in the October light. She was crying last night, he said, not with satisfaction, with the complicated gravity of a boy who is old enough to understand that the people who do harm are still people. I know, I said. Dad stayed in the kitchen a long time after everyone went to bed. I could hear him. He paused. I've never heard Dad cry before. I looked at my grandson, 15 years old, and carrying things no 15-year-old should have to carry, with a steadiness that continuously broke my heart in the best possible way. Your father is a good man, I said. Good men who look away from difficult things carry a specific kind of weight when they finally see them. It is heavy. And it is right that it's heavy, and it will change him. The weight is not a punishment, it's information. Jordan thought about this for a moment in Chester's thorough way. Grandma, he said, do you forgive her? I had been expecting this question. It is the question young people ask when something difficult has been resolved, because young people have been told that forgiveness is the destination of every hard story. They are not wrong about that exactly, but they sometimes misunderstand the distance. Forgiveness is not something I decide on a Sunday morning, I said. Forgiveness is something that happens in its own time, in its own way, when the truth has been fully told and the harm has been fully accounted for. What I feel right now is clear. That's different from forgiving, but it's the ground that forgiveness grows from. Eventually, if it's going to grow at all. Jordan nodded slowly. Then he said, I Googled diphenhydramine again last night. And? Some of the studies say that with regular high-dose exposure in elderly patients, there can be lasting effects, even after you stop taking it. He looked at me carefully. But some of them say the effects are fully reversible if the exposure was short-term and the patient has strong baseline cognitive function. I have very strong baseline cognitive function, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. I know. I just wanted to check. I looked at my grandson. He had spent the night, after everything that had happened at that dinner table, reading medical studies about reversibility of harm. Not because anyone asked him to, because he loved me, and love, in the Winters family, now had always expressed itself through the gathering of accurate information. Thank you, Jordan, I said. He looked out the window again. After a moment, he said quietly, I'm going to miss you when you go. It landed with the weight of something honest and undefended. I felt it the way you feel a thing when there is no performance between you and it. I'm 12 minutes away, I said. By car. 7 by bike, probably, for someone your age. You've already found a place? Not yet, but I will. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood to go, and at the door he paused. That same pause his grandfather always made. the gathering of one last careful thought. "Grandma," he said, "Grandpa Chester, did he know about all of this? When he wrote the letter?" I thought about that question. I thought about Chester in the last weeks of his life. Dow sitting in his chair by the window, still and watchful the way he had always been, turning things over in his mind with the long patience of a man who had learned that understanding comes to the one who waits for it. "He knew enough," I said. "The rest he trusted me to figure out." Jordan was quiet for a moment. "He was right to," he said, and he went downstairs to whatever the rest of that Sunday held. Monday morning came in gray and practical, the way Monday mornings do when they have work to do. I was dressed by 7. Navy slacks, a cream blouse, small pearl earrings. The same things I had worn to the pharmacy counter for 37 years when something important was happening, and I wanted to be steady enough that the people around me could be steady too. I carried my travel case and my yellow legal pad and the folder Marcus had given me, the one that contained the copies of everything, organized chronologically, each document labeled in the margin in my own handwriting. Warren was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was standing at the counter with a coffee mug in both hands, looking out the window above the sink, and he did not hear me come in at first. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched my son. He looked the way his father used to look when something had broken open in him, and he was sitting in the middle of the breakage, not yet able to move, not in despair, but in the particular stillness of a man taking inventory. He turned when he heard me. His eyes were tired. He had not slept much. "Mama," he said. "Good morning, Warren." He set down his mug. He looked at me with his father's eyes, and his father's quality of being unable to perform an emotion he did not feel. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right. I didn't know about the land. I promise you that. Chester never told me." He paused. "But I knew something was wrong and I didn't look at it. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that Denise was organized and practical, and that you were adjusting and that everything would settle. I told myself those things because they were easier than looking." His voice had gone rougher at the edges. "And that's not the same as not knowing. Not entirely. I understand that." I looked at my son. I thought about what Marcus had said. The evidence does not require him to have known. And then the thing Marcus had also said. The other thing. The one that had stayed with me. What he knew. Rest what he chose not to see. Those are questions for a different kind of proceeding. That proceeding was happening right now, in this kitchen, between a mother and her son. "Warren," I said, "your father told me in his letter that you were a good boy who had married a woman who worried him. He asked me to watch carefully. He didn't ask me to protect you from what I found. He knew I wouldn't need to be asked to do that." Warren pressed his lips together. He was trying very hard to hold his composure, the way men of his generation were taught to hold it, the way his father had, tightly, with dignity, but not at the cost of the truth of what they felt. "What can I do?" he said. "Tell me what I can do." "You can let Marcus's process proceed without interference," I said. "You can answer honestly whatever questions the authorities put to you. Now, you can be a father to Jordan right now, because Jordan did something brave and difficult, and he is going to need you to see that clearly." I paused. "And you can let me go." "Go where?" "Home," I said. "My own home. I need to find one, and I need to do it without anyone's help except the resources Chester left me, which are substantial enough that I am entirely capable of deciding what I need." Warren nodded. He had the look of a man performing the most difficult version of love, the kind that steps back and releases, the kind that says, "I caused this harm, at least in part, and the least I can do is not compound it by arguing about the remedy." "Can I?" He stopped. "Will you still let me call on Sundays?" The question was so Warren, so entirely his father's son in its stripped-down humility, that it moved something in me I hadn't expected to move that morning. "Yes," I said. "Every Sunday. Same as always." He nodded once. He picked up his mug. He went to the window again. I left for Marcus's office. The filing took most of the morning. The adult financial exploitation report went to the state authorities, accompanied by Patricia's lab report, Marcus's account reconstruction, and the Meridian Land Partners corporate filings. The asset protection transfer for the 40 acres was recorded with the county clerk's office before 10 o'clock, establishing my legal ownership with the unambiguous clarity of a recorded document in a public record, the kind of clarity that no letter of intent from a shell company can obscure. Yidi Marcus walked me through each step with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had spent 17 years making sure that the documentation outlasted the dispute. When we were done, he poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine on the credenza behind his desk, and he sat across from me, and for the first time in our professional relationship, he did not pick up a pen or open a folder or refer to a document. He simply sat and drank his coffee and looked at me the way Chester used to look at me when something difficult had been navigated, and there was a moment of quiet on the other side of it. "The planning office meeting is in 10 days, he said. Meridian Land Partners will present their letter of intent. The county recorder will note the recorded ownership. The meeting will be very brief after that." "And Denise?" I asked. "She retains private counsel, I expect. The exploitation matter will move at the speed of the relevant authorities. These cases take time, but the documentation is strong." He paused. "She will not be presenting any development interest in that parcel, and she will not be accessing that household account further." I nodded. "Marcus," I said, "what would Chester have done? At this point, I mean, with all of it." Marcus considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. "Chester," he said, "would have found a piece of land somewhere between here and home and planted something in it. Something that would take a long time to grow and be there long after he was gone." He paused. "And then he would have called you from a payphone, because your husband was the last man I knew who believed in payphones, and he would have said, 'Renee, come see what I've found.'" Chester was the only person who had ever called me Renee. I sat very still in Marcus's good leather chair on a Monday morning in October, with the October light coming through his office windows and 2 cups of coffee going gently cold between us. "I think," I said, when I trusted my voice again, "that I would like to find a house with a proper yard." "I think," Marcus said, "that you've earned one." There is a specific kind of accounting that happens after the formal proceedings have been initiated and the documents have been filed and the machinery of consequence has been set in motion. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and methodical, and it takes the time it takes, and while it takes that time, ordinary life continues around it. Denise retained an attorney. There were communications between attorneys, quiet and technical, dealing with the household account and its withdrawals and the documentation that Marcus had assembled. There were communications with the state authorities, who moved through their process with the unhurried efficiency of an institution that has seen this pattern before and knows exactly which boxes to check. I did not participate in any of this directly. I had Marcus, and Marcus was sufficient. What I did was look for a house. I did this with the particular pleasure of a woman who has been living in someone else's space for 14 months and has not forgotten what it feels like to choose her own. Wyatt, I worked with a real estate agent named Dolores, who had been in the business for 30 years and had the quality I most valued in a professional. She listened to what I said I wanted and did not suggest I might want something different. I told Dolores I wanted a house with 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for guests, one for Jordan. I wanted a kitchen with good light and enough counter space to cook properly. I wanted a yard with room for something to grow. I wanted a neighborhood where I could walk without planning a route in advance, where the sidewalks were even and the trees were old enough to have formed opinions. I told her 12 minutes from Emerald Pines, maximum. She found me 3 options in 10 days. The second one was the one. It was a craftsman bungalow on a street called Dawson Lane, 2 miles from the edge of Emerald Pines, close enough for Jordan to reach by bike in 7 minutes. I confirmed on a map, and I was correct. The house had been built in 1947 and had the particular quality of old houses that have been well loved. Not perfect, not showy, but honest. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a south-facing window above the sink, a backyard long enough for a garden, with a section near the fence that caught afternoon sun from October through April and would be exactly right for wisteria if a person were inclined. I was inclined. I made an offer on a Thursday. The offer was accepted by Friday afternoon. I told Warren over the phone on Friday evening. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Is it a good house, Mama?" And I told him it was an excellent house, and he said, "Good," with the particular sincerity of a man who has stopped performing his feelings and is simply having them. I told Jordan in person, because some things deserve to be said in person, particularly to 15-year-olds who have been carrying the weight of adult knowledge for several weeks and who deserve a piece of news that is good and simple and entirely without complication. He was in my room when I told him, sitting in Chester's chair. I told him about the bungalow, about the kitchen window, about the backyard, about the 7-minute bike ride. He listened to all of it with his grandfather's careful attention. Then he said, "Can I help you plant the wisteria?" "That," I said, "is the entire reason I'm telling you now instead of waiting." The move happened on a Saturday in November, and 3 weeks after the filing. It was not a complicated move. I had sold a furnished house 14 months earlier and moved into a furnished guest room, which meant that what I was taking with me was mostly mine in the original, essential sense, the things that had been too important to leave behind or sell. Chester's chair, Chester's Dutch oven, the yellow legal pads, my travel case, the blue mug, the framed photograph of Chester and me in the first year of our marriage, standing in front of the Magnolia Ridge Roadhouse before the wisteria had grown in, squinting into the sun with the particular happiness of people who have just made a good decision and know it. Warren helped me carry things. He did it quietly and steadily and without conversation, which was the right way to do it. He made 4 trips with boxes and never once said anything about whether I needed help or whether the boxes were too heavy or whether I was managing the stairs correctly. He treated me like a woman who knew her own capabilities, which is the most respectful thing a person can do for another person, and which he had not done, to his shame and his credit both, in quite some time. Jordan rode his bike. He arrived before the moving van and was waiting on the front porch of the bungalow when I pulled up, sitting on the top step with his helmet still on and a folded piece of paper in his hand. When I got out of the car, he stood up and held out the paper. "I drew the wisteria placement," he said. "I looked up the optimal sun exposure and the drainage requirements and the spacing for a mature spread." He opened the paper. It was a careful, detailed diagram of the backyard, with measurements and notes in his precise handwriting. "I think the southeast corner near the fence is the best spot. The afternoon sun will be consistent, and the drainage slopes away from the house." I took the diagram. I looked at it for a long time. Chester would have drawn this same diagram. Different handwriting, same precision, same understanding that the thing you plant for the future requires as much care in its placement as in its tending. "This is exactly right," I said. Jordan looked satisfied, in the way teenagers look satisfied when they have done something well and know it, and are too sensible to make a performance of knowing it. He tucked his helmet under his arm and picked up 2 of the lighter boxes from the moving van and carried them inside, because he had already, apparently, just identified which boxes were lighter and positioned himself accordingly. Laverne arrived at noon with Michael and a trunk full of food. A proper housewarming, she called it, which in Laverne's vocabulary meant enough to feed 8 people, and a pot of the black-eyed peas our mother used to make that Laverne had learned, and I had not, and which tasted, when she set the pot on my new kitchen counter in the south-facing light, like every good memory of every kitchen I had ever cooked in. We ate lunch on the floor of the living room because the furniture had not yet arrived, sitting on blankets that Laverne had thought to bring, and that Michael spread with the competent efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years managing the logistics of difficult situations. Jordan ate 3 helpings of black-eyed peas, and then went into the backyard with his diagram and a measuring tape he had apparently carried in his jacket pocket, and I watched him through the kitchen window measuring the southeast corner, brow furrowed, tape stretched along the fence line, absolutely absorbed. Chester's grandson. Chester's amber eyes, and Chester's patience, and Chester's understanding that the work of making a place yours is not in the moving of furniture, but in the choosing of what you plant and where you put it, and the recognition that the thing you plant today you will not see in its fullness for years, and that this is not a reason not to plant it, but is, in fact, the point. The county planning meeting happened on a Tuesday in November. I was not there. Marcus was there, high with the recorded ownership documentation and the chain of title going back to Chester's 1998 purchase, and the trust amendment that made the ownership structure unambiguous to anyone who wished to read it, which the county's title officer did, at the table, in front of the Meridian Land Partners representative, who had not expected to encounter a clean and current recorded claim on a parcel he had believed was accessible. The letter of intent was tabled. Meridian Land Partners' development interest in the 40 acres was, as Marcus described it to me in a phone call that afternoon, effectively concluded. "What happens to the land?" I asked him. I was standing at my kitchen sink, looking out the south-facing window at the backyard, where the November light was showing me exactly the angle it would take in spring. "That," Marcus said, "is entirely your decision. There are two developers with legitimate interest. There is also the option of placing the parcel in a conservation easement, which would generate a significant tax benefit and preserve the land from commercial development permanently. And there is the option of holding it as Chester held it, patiently, for as long as you choose." I thought about Chester's long view, the 1998 purchase, 27 years of holding a piece of land through two recessions, through development booms, through the particular kind of pressure that comes when something you own becomes worth more than you paid for it, and people begin to have opinions about what you should do with it. He had not done anything with it. He had simply held it, and paid the taxes, and told no one, and trusted me. "I'll hold it," I said. "For now. Let me think about what Chester would have wanted it to become." "That seems entirely right," Marcus said. The exploitation matter moved through its process over the following months. I will not detail every step of it, because the steps are not the story. What matters is what the steps produced: a formal finding of financial exploitation, documented and adjudicated, with the account withdrawals attributed to their source, and a restitution order established. The household account was closed. The remaining balance, what was left of my contribution after 18 months of unauthorized withdrawals, was returned to me. It was not everything that had been taken. Some of it was simply gone, spent on things that could not be recovered. But enough came back that, lying combined with the resources Chester had left me, I was standing on ground that was entirely and unambiguously mine. No account I did not control. No system managed by someone else's hands. No quarterly statements that failed to arrive. My own bank. My own account. My own morning, every morning, at my own kitchen counter, with my own coffee in Chester's mug. Denise and Warren separated in January. I learned this from Warren, who called on a Sunday, same as always, and told me quietly, without drama, that they were working with a mediator and that the primary concern was Jordan. He said it the way a man says something when he has done a great deal of thinking and has arrived at a place that is painful and honest and the right place to be. I did not say I'm sorry because I was not certain I was. I said, "How is Jordan?" And Warren said, "He's all right. He's good, actually. He's been coming to your house a lot on weekends." "He's been helping me with the garden," I said. "I know," Warren said. "He talks about it." There was a pause, the kind that happens between a mother and a son when they are navigating a changed landscape together, and both of them are paying attention to where they step. "Mama," Warren said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Dr. Patton, did he know? What was in those vitamins?" I had thought about this carefully. Patricia's lab report had been forwarded to the state medical board as part of the exploitation filing. The question of whether the physician's recommendation had been solicited and whether he had been told what he was recommending was part of an ongoing review that was not mine to adjudicate. That's for the board to determine, I said. I'll let them do their work. And if he did know, then he will face the consequences that correspond to what he knew and did. That is how accountability works, Warren. It is not selective. A long pause. I'm sorry, Mama, he said. I know I keep saying it. I know it doesn't fix what it didn't fix. But I am. I know you are, I said. And I know the difference between a son who looks away because he is complicit and a son who looks away because he is afraid. I'm not telling you that fear is a justification. I'm telling you that I know the difference, and I know which one you were. The work now is making sure you never have to be afraid to look in the same direction again. Warren was quiet for a long moment. Come for Sunday dinner next week, I said. I'm making the macaroni again. Bring Jordan. Yes, ma'am, he said, in his father's voice, which he was finding more often now. March arrived with warmth and rain and the particular restlessness of a season that is done being patient. Jordan and I planted the wisteria on a Saturday afternoon in the southeast corner of the backyard, following the diagram he had drawn in November with such care. He had done additional research in the intervening months, on soil amendment, on root depth, on training methods for the first growing season. He brought a printed guide from a university extension office, annotated in his own handwriting in the margins, and he talked me through each step with the seriousness of a person performing a ceremony. We worked for 2 hours. The light was good. So the soil in the corner was exactly what the diagram had indicated. Well-drained, afternoon sun consistent, room for a mature spread without crowding the fence. When we were done, we sat on the back steps with our hands dirty and our coffee going cold the way coffee does when something more important than coffee is happening. And Jordan looked at the small, unpromising length of vine we had just committed to the earth and said, with his grandfather's absolute seriousness, "It'll take 3 years before it really blooms." I know, I said. Some people wouldn't plant something they'd have to wait 3 years for. Your grandfather planted this kind of thing his entire life, I said. He planted things he was never going to see in their fullness. He planted them anyway, because he understood that what you put in the ground today is not for you alone. It's for whoever comes after you and inherits the garden. Jordan thought about this for a long moment. The 40 acres, he said. He had not asked about the 40 acres directly before. But he was 15 and a half now, and the months had changed him in the ways that months change people who are paying careful attention to everything around them. He had earned the direct question. What about them? I said. What are you going to do with them? I looked at the wisteria, the small, unpromising length of vine committed to the good soil in the afternoon sun. I've been thinking, I said, that Chester bought that land without knowing exactly what it would become. He just knew it had value that other people hadn't recognized yet. And he was patient enough to let the value develop in its own time. I paused. I think I want to do something with it that Chester would find satisfying. Something with a long view. Like what? I've been talking to a community land trust organization. They work with municipalities to preserve land for mixed-income housing development, the kind that doesn't get displaced when property values rise, because the land itself is held in permanent community ownership. I looked at Jordan. The 40 acres are in a county where development pressure has been building for 30 years. If that land were preserved in a community trust, it couldn't be turned into another subdivision of identical houses. It would have to serve the people who already live in that county. Jordan was quiet, turning this over with his grandfather's thorough attention. Would Chester have done that? He asked. I thought about the man who had driven a used pickup truck for 16 years and had his boots resoled by Mr. Beaumont on 4th Street and had said, quietly, without performance, that the best things in life didn't need advertising, who had built his practice by telling the truth about the value of land, even when the truth was inconvenient, who had written a letter on yellow legal paper in his careful, deliberate hand and trusted me to figure out the rest. I think Chester would have said that the point of having more than you need is not to protect it, I said. The point is to use it to make the ground better for the people who come after you. Jordan nodded slowly. Then he said, Grandma, can I come when you meet with the land trust? I'd like to understand how it works. I looked at my grandson, 15 and a half years old, Chester's eyes in the afternoon light, sitting in the garden of a house that was mine, asking to be present for the long view. Yes, I said. I think you should. There is a woman who comes to the pharmacy counter on the third Tuesday of every month. She is in her late 60s, and she picks up 4 prescriptions, 2 for herself and 2 for her husband. And she always asks me to go over the interactions with her, even though she has been taking these medications for years. She is not confused, she is careful. There is a difference. I know this because I was her for 37 years. The one behind the counter who understood that carefulness is not the same as fear, and that asking the question you already know the answer to is not redundancy. It is confirmation. It is making certain that the thing you believe to be true is still true today. In this bottle, in this label, in this particular combination of compounds being put into this particular body. I'm not behind the counter anymore. I'm on the other side of it, which gives me a view I did not have before. And what I can tell you from this side is what I have always known from the other. The most important thing is reading the label, not once, not when you first receive it, but every time, with fresh eyes and with the willingness to act on what you find. I read the label. Jordan read the label. Chester in his careful and permanent way. Wyatt had spent a lifetime reading the labels on everything, the parcels and the people and the promises, and had trusted me to do the same. I am 73 years old. I live in a craftsman bungalow on Dawson Lane, with Chester's chair by the window and Chester's Dutch oven on the counter, and a south-facing kitchen window that shows me the backyard, where a small length of wisteria vine is committed to the ground in the southeast corner, and will, in approximately 3 years, begin to show what it was always going to become. My pension is mine. My account is mine. My mornings are mine. My Sunday dinners, with Warren, who comes every week, who has been in therapy since January, and who is, slowly and honestly, becoming the man his father thought he could be, are mine. Jordan comes on weekends and stays for dinner and talks to me about everything, the way teenagers talk to the people they trust most, with the full weight of what they're actually thinking, unedited, unmanaged. Denise and I do not have a relationship. This is not hatred, and it is not forgiveness, and it is not something I expect either of us to resolve in the near term. It is simply the accurate accounting of what exists between 2 people after what existed between us. I do not wish her harm. I also do not pretend that harm was not done. Marcus calls on the last Monday of each month with an update on the land trust process, which is moving at the careful pace of something being done correctly. The 40 acres are still in the trust. The community land trust negotiation is ongoing. Chester's long view is being honored, I believe, while in the way he would have wanted. Patricia Odom came for dinner in February and sat in Chester's chair and ate 3 helpings of macaroni, and told me that the lab report had been cited in a state-level review of over-the-counter supplement labeling standards for elderly patients. She said it quietly, the way professionals say things when they are proud of work that was difficult and right. I told her I was glad. I told her that the pharmacist who notices the label saves the patient, but the pharmacist who documents what she found saves the next one. She raised her coffee mug. I raised mine. I want to say one more thing, and then I will let this story be what it is. The people who will call what I did in those 3 months suspicious, who will say that a woman who documents and waits is a woman who was looking for a reason to act, who will say that family is complicated and I should have spoken directly, and that there was probably a misunderstanding that could have been resolved over a conversation. Those people have never been the woman in the guest room. They have never been the person for whom the conversation has already been replaced, slowly and carefully, by the management of her reality. When someone is invested in your confusion, direct conversation does not resolve anything. It only gives them information about how much you know, which they will use to adjust the management. I know this not because I am suspicious by nature. I know it because I spent 37 years watching what happens when a patient trusts the wrong label, and I know that the label that will harm you is almost never loud about what it contains. The compound was at the bottom of the ingredient list, in slightly smaller type, under a trade name I did not recognize at first glance. First glance. I recognized it on second glance because I was a pharmacist for 37 years, and because Chester Winters raised me to read the fine print of everything, and because Jordan, my grandson, Chester's eyes in a 15-year-old face, Googled it out of love on a Tuesday afternoon and came to show me what he'd found. I do not know what would have happened to me if I had taken those vitamins faithfully every morning. I know what was intended to happen. See, I know what diphenhydramine does to a 73-year-old brain, taken daily, in compound concentration. I know what a petition for incompetency looks like when it has been built over months, with witness observations at the dinner table and a sympathetic physician's note, and a woman who has been documented as forgetful by the people responsible for her care. I know what happens to a land parcel that a woman with documented cognitive decline is deemed unable to manage. I know all of this not because I am bitter, but because knowing it is the reason I am sitting in my own kitchen right now, in the south-facing morning light, writing on a yellow legal pad the way Chester always did, looking out at the backyard where the wisteria is doing what young things do, growing slowly, quietly, in the good soil, with no announcement and no performance, and the absolute certainty of something that knows what it is going to become. To every woman reading or listening to this who has been handed a bottle of something and told to trust someone else's label, read it yourself. Every word, every compound, every trade name you don't recognize at first glance. And if the 15-year-old in your life brings you a phone screen with something highlighted in red, listen to him. He may have just saved your life, and he deserves to know that you know it. Chester, I kept it safe, every bit of it. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.